Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast. We'll be continuing today with our exploration of Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics, and today we're looking at step 10, specifically the section on Deity Yoga. So, we're in a beautiful spot in the mountains here. Unfortunately, it is evening and the mosquitoes are popping out now, so we're going to record this inside. I'll throw a picture up for you guys of the location. It's beautiful, if I can remember to. So, step 10, Deity Yoga. What is Deity Yoga? This is the union, yoga being a type of union with a deity. So, with this Bardon approach, the first thing we discuss is the prerequisite skill sets that have been cultivated and accumulated over the course of the training. And this is always an important thing to review, especially when we start looking at explorations of unification with Godheads, or the pinnacle, ultimate, supreme, absolute of what we can fathom as intelligence and space within the universe. So, why is this so important? Well, if we haven't prepared the body energetically to be able to sustain and withstand higher levels of energy, if we haven't cultivated our ethics to be able to work with and integrate those higher levels of energy as they pressurize different layers of the emotional substrate, if we haven't purified the mind, the view, and also really gotten to know the ins and outs of how the mind functions and concentrates, if we haven't developed a really strong relationship with Akasha and with light, then this can start to become a bit of an issue, especially with Deity Yoga, because, as we mentioned in step 9, you can run the risk of rampant delusions, delusions of grandeur and incredible superinflation of the lower ego. So that's why the prerequisites are very important. Ideally, one has cultivated a mindscape, a view, and an astral sphere as well, an astral body that is capable of having these deity frequencies, energies, figures running through, right? They are closer to alignment, right? Now, of course, if you work with a higher vibration of energy and you invoke a deity prematurely, there's different reactions, and they can be positive. You can work with this stuff a little bit prematurely and still have a type of positive reaction, in that you might encounter every aspect of yourself that is in contrast to that deity. Now, let's say you're working from a Buddhist standpoint. It might be one of the bodhisattvas, it might be one of the Dharma protectors, or one of the wisdom Buddhas, so on and so forth. And as you work with these beings, this is why those systems can be really nice, the ones that have many, many subsets of deity-like figures, is that you can sort of work your way up the vibrational scale through the deities. There's this hierarchy within that religious culture and that spiritual framework. Whereas if you're working from a from a Judeo-Christian type of standpoint, you sort of have God or Jesus or something like that, and your potential options get funneled. And This can make some things easier, but it can also make things a little bit harder in terms of the openness of the perspective. Because when you do have a number of different deities and figures within the spiritual framework, then you can sort of work your way around and start spiraling through different intensities of expansiveness and of precision. You can see all these common denominators as you start to work your way around. So it's good to explore all of it. Now, assuming that we've cultivated a landscape that a deity has some resonance with, then you begin to work with this. And there are the qualities that we mentioned in step 9 of immortality, all lovingness, all wisdom, omniscience, right, and omnipotence. So those being to earth, water, air, and fire, respectively. So these are the sort of all-encompassing qualities that any deity type figure would have, especially if it is the pinnacle deity figure, right? And there's certainly a lot of value and fun and exploration to be had in a deity union type of practice. Now, the 4 steps that Bardon mentions with this are he calls it a mystical passive and a magical active, right? So a mystical passive approach, a magical active approach. Each of those has a concrete and an abstract method, we could say, right? So you'd have a mystical passive, concrete or abstract, or magical active, concrete or abstract. So these are your beginning variations to play with. The mystical passive, this is the one that anyone who's done a lot of meditation or has gone very much into the depths of religious prayer would likely have experienced, which is similar to one of the early jhanas, actually, in a Buddhistic type meditative framework, which is rapture and bliss start to arise. And this is a very natural byproduct of concentration. When you're able to let go of the intensity of trying to hold an object of concentration, you release into that point of samadhi and you get that mergence of object and observer, and then there's a total breaking, a popping open, and you're just there in this particular state of jhana, of absorption, and of deep, deep bliss and rapture. This is very recognized within the body. It's very recognized within the astral landscape. It's very recognized within the mental landscape as well, right? And because it's so nice, you don't want to leave that place. And upon reflection later on, a really common expression is like, oh, if I died there in that space, it wouldn't have mattered. If I, my legs fell off, it's all good. Everything is good. It's rapture. It's bliss. And this is a state that can be achieved through any type of deep meditation, prayer type of work. Now, this is called the passive manner, because through that ecstasy that starts to arise, and it's not exactly the same as just raw physical pleasure, or raw emotional pleasure, or raw mental pleasure, which all has to do with sort of craving and aversion. This is on the other side of the Akashic bridge, on the other side of equanimity. So it's a very different flavor. And why this is called the passive manner is that you're not trying to evoke qualities of a God figure, a deity figure, through the organic process of the meditation, though some of these qualities start to arise quite spontaneously and naturally. So to some, this would be the most organic and natural approach, because you aren't trying to make anything happen. However, we also have the active approach. And what's nice about the active approach, what Bardon describes as the magical active approach, is that you can sort of speed up some of this process. It's kind of like, if you know where you're going, it's easier to get there, right? You can take the road that you need to take to get to the place that you want to go. You can also drive around and really enjoy getting lost and end up at a place as well, spontaneously. Both have their merit. So the Tantric Buddhist type of approach, like Vajrayana and many of the they're called like non-dual systems of work. Shaivism is one as well. They do a lot with this active approach. It's quite interesting. So we'll get into that. Now, the active approach is where you envision, before we get to that, with the passive approach, once you are in that state of bliss and of absorption, then you might start to get some reflections of religious-esque visual phenomena or sensory phenomena through your clairvoyance or clairaudience, etc. And this will be typically based off what systems you have been brought up in, right? What culture you're in. If you're Christian, you might get, as he mentions, images of a cross coming through your mind, or a dove. If you're Jewish, it might be a Star of David. If you are Buddhist, it might be the figure of a Buddha, etc., etc., etc. Sometimes people will get symbols. If you're into Hermetics, it might be more sacred geometry. So there's so many different ways that this can express. And the representation through the clairgates is almost irrelevant insofar as it's just a type of sensory reflection or expression of that state that you've achieved through the passive, deep, innate natural approach. Now, when you're working the active approach, you know where you're going, and so you start to elevate yourself to the place of that deity, and that deity starts to come down to sort of meet you in the middle. And this is what most evocation and invocation is you might start with a symbol of your deity and then work your way towards that symbol. And that symbol would be imbued with the qualities of omnipotence, omniscience, all-lovingness, and immortality. Of course, the fundamental quality that all of those are absorbed into is omnipresence. And once you've met, then you start to engage with this union, and there'll be flickerings off and back on. And so this is where you might have, like we said, representations of that deity through maybe you take the cross, or you take a concept of the deity and you move yourself towards that concept being imbued with those divine attributes according to their elements. Now, the passive approach and the active approach, there's sort of wars that go on with those about what is the most true. And so you could say that with the active approach, you might miss out on some things, a few of the steps. Instead of it being a sliding scale, it can be a little bit more direct. So with the active approach, you might have sigils and all types of different physical phenomena, we could say, that act as access points or doorways, right, to that frequency of the deity. And this whole deity yoga thing is something I have a lot of fun with. That there's a lot of really valuable stuff you can get out of it, because the lessons that come through are inexplicable, monumental. Now, as you keep exploring this, there are, say from the Tantric Buddhist perspective, you might spend deep time in retreat, like months on end in retreat, building your concept of a deity, right? Building the image of what that deity is, so that it's, and this is really interesting reading some of how Bardon describes this, is it's very similar to some of that like Vajrayana-esque Tantric Buddhist type stuff, where you would spend, okay, here's the thing, is that it's very easy to sort of not really put the time in, and kind of, oh, I'll just kind of do this thing. The flippant attitude is one that we want to avoid. We want to approach this with deep humility, the magnetism, the water element of devotion, the reverence, the elevation, right, the air element, and of course the sacred aspect to the flame, to the fire element. That's all a part of this, right? It's really important. Now, when you are doing this in a more traditional framework, like I said, you might spend months building your visualization of the deity to the point where it is bright and alive. It can move and change, and wherever you are, bang, you can pop it right there. And you build this framework in through months of retreat-styled meditation. You build the qualities into this deity. Now, Bardon talks about this is only doing this as with the all-encompassing everything absolute God figure, deity, but like we said, you can do this with any of the spectrum. So you build the qualities in, you build the characteristics in, and you get to know from a separate standpoint this deity, right? This expression of divine quality. And then you have the emergence aspect. And this is where, in more tantric traditions, you will envision like a sexual union between the practicer and the deity as a representation of that coming together. And it's not the only way that you can do that, but it's one that can also be done with a partner. So both see the divine in the other person during that union, and that's a whole other topic of conversation, is the whole tantric sexual side of the actual spiritual practice, not the money-making, more new age side of sort of, I might say like hedonistic practice. It's more sensory exploration, which people can find some good value in terms of healing, sexual trauma, and all kinds of hang-ups in, but it is not the spiritual side of the path, right? That's in the deity union aspect. So anyway, you build this figure, and then you bring that into you through the mind, through the astral body, right? And you imbue the mental and astral bodies with the capacities and qualities of this deity. You do this to the point where you and the deity become one, right? There is no separation. And if you do this enough, there's this really bringing on the identity of the deity itself. And one of the interesting things that can come out of this is different expressions of some of the powers or bodily changes, chemical changes that can occur with deep reverent states of practice. So what's nice about this is that it really gets you out of the way. If you've done the work prior to starting this, it really gets the individual out of the way, because you're giving up yourself to the higher intelligence at all levels, to the deity. And so there's so much value in that type of humility, because the openness is so full. The openness, the emptiness is so overpowering. And it's quite a relief to give up your own intellectual pursuit of a path, right? Your own understanding of how things should be or have to be, and give yourself up. So that's one of the things that I really like about the Deity Yoga, is it really offers that up as a potential. Now, there's another side that we need to explore here, which is the inclusion of a teacher, or the guru yoga. And this is something that Bardon's very clear about, that you don't need to have a living or dead actual human that you are doing this with. Ramifications positive of doing it with a human is, again, living or dead, would be assuming they were actual, fully realized beings, and there was no personality left, and they were just a walking, talking, breathing, eating, living expression of a fully realized being. Most people still have people left, still have a person left. And so that's something we want to be very careful of, is giving yourself over fully to a human being, right? Humans have a lot of flaws, a lot of delusions of grandeur, especially if you take just a slight turn in a funny direction on this path. The supercharged ego runs rampant. And if you're in the beginning and you can't discern the full depth of someone's development, then you run the risk of a lot of manipulation and essentially like wasting this life, not going anywhere, or making progress on your path. So that's something to note. And that's one of the things with Deity Yoga, is you can sort of move beyond the need to learn from humans, and you start to learn from the deities themselves. Now the reason, and then of course beyond that into like universal principle. Now, the reason that a guru might be invoked, or that the need to have one, would be to offer the transmission of the deity. They act as a bridge that links you and the deity through their own relationship to the deity. So ideally, you have a training framework that builds you to a point, and this is something that Bardon mentions in this particular chapter, where you can touch in through the Akasha. You can touch in to any system and start to make contact with and receive the transmission, the direct connection and union with the deities of different systems. And this allows you to move away from the need to have a guru. Now, anyone who has done a traditional system approach will go, that's bullshit. You can't do that. You need to have a guru. And people who've developed a very high skill, in the absence of that, will go, nope, we don't have to do that. So it's interesting that all of the lineage holder type of people will absolutely say you need to have the transmission through a human. And the people who aren't lineage holders will go, oh yeah, you don't really need to. And the levels of skill can be pretty comparable. So that's something to note here, because it is a sticking point with a lot of this type of work, is the need for the human. Now, to assume, this is the other thing that we need to discuss here, is to assume that you are connecting with no transmission from a human with one of these states or higher level deities, etc. To assume that that connection is taking place is maybe a little bit errant, because you might be experiencing all of this from your lower, three-dimensional state of being, from your lower kind of ego and self, which is why having worked through the depths of samadhi, akasha, to the point where you've touched a shenming type of natural, spontaneous releasing of light, there's some things that we really want to make sure that we can achieve, so that we can progress with a little bit more certainty in our own relationship to all of this stuff, right? And you can engage, if you're diligent and open-minded and humble, with a more, we could say, natural approach, which in the absence of a teacher will still take you through all these connections and open you up to relationships with deities and greater beings and beyond. So that's really important. It's the depths of humility that you're able to tap into. So that's really, really important. Okay, now, why do all this? Apart from the incredible transformation that you go through, is that on the other side of it, you have a, how do we put this, almost a one-for-one relationship with something that is beyond your highest conceptual model of what a godhead or deity might be. That relationship can be evoked, boom, pretty instantly. So that allows one to start exploring higher level spheric magic, higher level spiritual endeavors, with a fairly solid safety network in place, because you are exploring from the place of in terms of respect and sovereignty and power and authority of a deity being, right? Not from the standpoint of a human. And so this can allow for a greater safety in those explorations, right? This is all worked to the point where any visualizations are no longer, those are just tools, they're stepping stones. So this is where you get, again, that war between passive and active approaches. The active approach, these are stepping stones. These help us pave the way of that road that we're walking, right? And once we've paved that road, the beginning and the end start to collapse into each other, right? And that's really, really important. Where any specific visualization dissolves, any specific naming of or even bodily orientation to one of these divine qualities dissolves, and what you're left with is this thing behind the thing that is the inexplicable, one, all-encompassing, qualitative, we could say, frequency or energy that can be outside of oneself and then found within oneself. And all of the other stuff, whether it's even evoking light or any type of specific figures of any kind, that all dissolves as you start to come into equilibrium, right? To equalize with this quality of energy, right? Now, when you do this, before you equalize, you can, like we said at the beginning, experience every aspect of yourself that is in contrast to these great qualities. And that kind of sucks, right? It doesn't feel good. So you need to have developed a really strong relationship with equanimity so that you can observe all the ways in which you are deficient or coming up short in comparison to a deity. And then you allow the relationship with the deity to start to unwind and build upon and equalize you into resonance with that, with those qualities, with that frequency. And then you have the other side of it where you just are, poof, you merge into that, and you might be ignoring through your focus some of the things that need to move. Through that reverence, you're in with that frequency. But then can be a flex point where bang, you drop into the parts of you that aren't in resonance with it, and that can be a pretty big rhythmic shift. And it's those shifts where that require all this energy, when we're shifting from one frequency to another. And this is where, as we keep developing and finding a deeper relationship and connection with what we might call our nature, the thing behind the thing behind the thing behind the thing, our personal akasha, spirit, that all of these energies can start to flex and move through, and realign the mental body, realign the astral body, and even to some interesting extents, the physical body. That's a very fascinating one, especially as you start to experience the changes in the body. So it's that realignment through the physical components, mental, astral, physical, that can require a lot of energy. All right, so this is where there's a lot of value in working with one, say, deity or one frequency for a while, so you can really find that relationship to your essence, to your nature, underneath or within or around all of this change, the space in which all of this change is occurring. And so as you start to settle into that, then these alignments are able to occur much more easily, right? So contrast, resistance consumes energy. Most of the experiences that we might have, mentally, astrally, physically, of union with a higher frequency, grander intelligence, most of those experiences expressing through the sense gates, even often through the clair gates, are expressions of resistance, right? And so it's through really connecting to that nature, to that essence, that we start to get a more and more truthful, from an absolute standpoint, reference to what this stuff is. Okay, even things like fullness, fullness of energy, oh, so much energy. Well, if you keep working that, eventually you equalize with it, and eventually you can be empty, and that energy can pass through. You actually become a conduit. The more pure that conduit is, the less identity that energy pressurizes, that frequency pressurizes, that relationship to deity, etc., pressurizes, right? So this is really, really important. Now, once you've sort of got this dialed in, then there is the communication, and that will reflect through either your intuition and claircognizance or through your clair gates. And this is where you start to learn and receive all kinds of transformational stuff, for lack of any better word. Okay, I think we'll call it there for this one. Thank you for your time and for listening. If you are interested in training, I have a retreat coming up here June 2025. This is in Powell River, BC, Canada. And this is a spiritual attunement retreat. It is 16 days total, split into a level 1 and level 2. So you can find the information on the website there. Speaking of the website, big thank you to everyone who is subscribed there, as it allows me to keep exploring all of this spiritual stuff with a little more ease. There are training courses online in Tai Chi and Qi Gong, Hermetic Alchemy, and meditation, as well as a Q&A reference library that's filled with well over hundreds of videos at this point. There's a lot of videos on there. So any questions you have, I upload video answers for you. And, oh yes, private coaching. I offer online video private coaching calls for serious practitioners who are really invested in change and transformation and growth and the evolution of the spirit on the path. So thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next one. All right, bye.